Hi everybody, welcome. It is really great to see all of you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And we appreciate you keeping your masks on while you're inside and keeping your social distance. However, if you are in the same household, you can move your chairs closer together if you want to be together. So welcome to the second in our series of events. This is a year-long series with Jewish Silicon Valley's women's community. And if you're not aware that Jewish Silicon Valley was the result of a merger between Jewish Federation of Silicon Valley and the Aztec JCC. And our mission is to harness the power of community to improve lives, build bridges of understanding, and strengthen the Jewish people here in Israel and around the world. So we launched this series of conversations a few months ago as part of our effort to bring together our amazing community of women with a focus on inclusivity, empowerment, and connection. So first I want to thank Sherry Shanker, who has brought tremendous creativity and drive to bring these programs together for us. I also want to thank Grace Gilmore for helping to pull everything together tonight. So thank you for everything. We're very lucky also to have Jenessa Schwartz here to share her journey with us. And Jenessa is not only a thriver, but she also inspires us as a dedicated parent and a wonderful teacher. And I also want to welcome Dr. Parish, who's going to give us his perspective as a colorectal surgeon. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sherry and enjoy. Thanks for being here.
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our sponsor, Family Matters Home Care, who is committed to providing competent, caring, and skilled professionals for all circumstances. I'm going to be reading a little bit, so sorry. When I became aware of Jenessa's story from her lovely mom, I was completely in awe, and I was on a mission to meet her and be her friend. I'm proud to say I've accomplished those intentions. I'm honored to be talking with you tonight, and I'm humbled that you've agreed to share your story with us. I would also like to thank Dr. Parish, who I'm fortunate enough to call a friend, who will be speaking to us shortly. Here's to destigmatizing talking about shit, literally. And we'll start. Jenessa, what were you doing in February 2017?
February 2017. I was right in the middle of a health screening because I was going to embark on a second surrogate pregnancy. I had delivered twins a couple years before that for a lovely couple down in LA, and I wanted to do it again. So they introduced me to friends of theirs who were looking for a surrogate. And let me tell you, this health screening was no joke. They tested for everything under the sun. I had blood tests and physical exams and ultrasounds and all manner of screenings. The only issue that the doctors found was a slight vitamin D deficiency.
Interesting.
That's about it. Yeah, interesting.
So everything was all good.
Everything was good, yeah.
So you're going ahead with your surrogacy, which is insane to me, because I don't know why anybody would do that, but good for you. So many people are pushed aside when they have issues with their bowels. How did your symptoms resemble pregnancy?
Right, so what was happening around that time is I was having some interesting bowel habits. The combination of, I call it the special combination, like at a Chinese food restaurant, where you have days of diarrhea, you have days of constipation, and they just kind of make this very enjoyable mix.
I can understand.
Yes, I'm sure many people can.
Yes.
We were preparing for Purim at school, which is a really big deal at Yavna. We work a lot on the school experience, and it's a slightly stressful time. I was also doing a spiel with Beth David, and so I was doing that. We were also right in the middle of our school musical extravaganza, so there were lots of things happening at the time, and so I just kind of put these bowel symptoms off as stress or what have you. And then I started having some blood in my stool. And by some, I'm under-exaggerating. It's called litotes, for those of you who care. It's the opposite of hyperbole, just a fun fact. I had, when I say blood in my stool, I mean like toilet bowl full of blood in my stool.
And you know I get that.
Yes.
Because I have ulcerative colitis.
Yes,
So
you
sometimes
get all of this.
I have a toilet bowl full of blood.
Right.
And it's so lovely.
Yeah. And what's super fun about toilet bowls of blood when you're a woman is that you're not always sure where it's coming from.
Yes.
Right? So I just completely, my co-teacher is here, and she will tell you that I just was like, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's nothing. And she's like, no, you should really talk to a doctor. And I was like, ask for form. Can we just get reform, please? So we did. Although she did make me go to the doctor. So for that, I'm very grateful to her. So I went to the doctor, but what was ridiculous though was I had just had this health screening, and I was given a clean bill of health, except take some vitamin D pills. And so I was like, there can't be anything wrong. I just went through this screening. So plus I was a young mom, so I had 2017, I have to do math. I had a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old? Is that right? Yeah, and so, young moms are tired all the time, and I had been pregnant or breastfeeding since 2009, right? I was first pregnant in 2009, had my daughter, had my son very quickly thereafter, and then I had the twins, and so I had been pregnant forever. And those of you who've been pregnant know that pregnancy messes with your bowels as well.
Just a bit.
Just a little, just a tad. And it also makes you really tired and can cause some nausea, right? Which also happens to be symptoms of colon cancer. Surprise, surprise. So, kind of forget where I was going with that. But anyway, so I was sure it was nothing. I called the doctor, he had me come in, and he told me he was gonna do a rectal exam. And I was mortified.
Better than a pap smear.
So much better than a pap smear. If you leave with anything, it's that rectal exams are actually quite pleasant.
Not a big deal.
And way better than a pap smear. So don't be afraid of rectal exams. They make these huge, right? They make the nurse come in and watch the doctor do it. And it's like, he was done. I was like, you want to do it again? It's kind of nice. So yeah, no big deal. Don't be afraid of rectal exams. So he did the rectal exam, and he's like, well, I thought it might be a hemorrhoid. I don't feel one in there. And there was a little blood, just a little bit of blood on his glove when he was done. And he's like, just to be safe, I'm gonna order a colonoscopy. And I was like, fuck. I knew I shouldn't have gone to the doctor. Like, damn you, Jamie. It's your fault. Don't want a colonoscopy, and then haha, joke, it's probably nothing, but I can't promise it's not colon cancer, were his exact words. Kind of jokey, not super jokey, not inappropriate jokey, but not completely serious either. So, so we scheduled the colonoscopy. It was for after Purim, so I did get through Purim and the spiel and the musical, and it was all good. I just remember that day, I had to tell Shannon Guggenheim, I'm like, so I might have internal bleeding and you might have to go on for me. And she's like, okay. She was game. She did it. Anyhow, so I get the colonoscopy and honestly didn't think it was going to be anything. And my cousin was the one who took me, so she could probably tell the story better because I was on some real good drugs. But I did the prep, also not as scary as you think it's gonna be, the colonoscopy prep. We went in, and the twilight drugs are super nice. I had a
So
really
good,
nap.
so good.
They're the best. And I woke up to this panicked doctor who actually sent me a note several months later apologizing for her behavior, which was shocking to me. No offense to doctors or anything, but I was not expecting that. But she woke me up out of this twilight sleep, like visibly shaken, pale, saying, we need to get you down to CT. You have a almost complete blockage. I think it's cancer. And I'm still under sedation. I'm like, what? I had no idea what she was saying. I don't know how much you processed any of that either, but so they took me down to CT, had a CT scan, and then I had an appointment for, was it the next day, or if it was, I don't know, yeah, I think it was the very next day. I had an appointment with the surgeon because they thought it was a complete blockage. They would have to do emergency surgery. So I go into this surgeon's office, and of course I know him because he's Jewish. And it turns out he went to Camp Shalom with my aunt. He's like, I think I know your aunt. And also, I'm the guy who's going to tell you you have cancer. And so he told me I have stage 4 colon cancer. It had spread to my liver and to my peritoneum, which is it's basically the lining of your stomach. It kind of keeps all of your internal organs in place. And I think that was it at that point. Yeah, colon, liver, peritoneum. And it was just, I didn't quite know how to process that. But the first thing I thought of was like, I have to call the new daddies and tell them that I can't do this surrogacy. And that was really one of the most heartbreaking things. I mean, before, yes, I had small children and a family and everything, but like, the first thing I thought of was like, I have to tell these dads that I can't do this thing for them that I was gonna do. And that was really heartbreaking.
We're so willing to talk about certain types of cancer just because of anatomy. For example, like we spoke about pap smears. Everybody gets a pap smear. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so like poop and blood and farts and all the things associated with digestive problems are so taboo. I mean, I remember as a teenager complaining about cramps, right? When you first get your period, you're like, oh, cramps. And I just remember it was so easy to talk to my friends about getting my period. But like, when do you ever talk to your teenage friends about like being constipated, or like having poops that hurt, right? Like, you don't talk to your friends about that.
No.
But we should, because when you talk to your friends about your poops, they make you go to the doctor and they catch stage 4 cancer. And so it's all, it's a good thing. We really should. And my cancer, I'm lucky that my cancer is the like great trifecta of like poop, farts, and blood. And so I get to talk about it all the time. And everybody should talk about it all the time. I have this thing, and I don't do it so much anymore, but in the beginning, when I was all rah-rah, let's talk about poop, I would ask my kids who were very young, like we'd talk about school or whatever, and then I'd ask them, like, hey, did you poop today? And they tell me, and then I'd say, like, oh, what color was it? Or, did it hurt? Did it feel good? How big was it? Right, we just try to normalize poop talk so that they wouldn't be ashamed, right? Like, the last thing I want is for my kids to not feel like we can talk about something that's hurting them because people think poop is gross.
Absolutely, and I can 100% relate to that as well. And why do you think it is so scary in our culture to talk about death?
Yeah, people don't like to talk about death either. It's like right up there with poop. I think maybe a little higher, actually. I don't know why we as a culture don't talk about death. I mean, no, I do know why. That's dumb. Because it's sad. And because we don't want to think about our loved ones dying.
Of course.
But it's something that we really do need to talk about as a culture. I recently read a book. It was, gosh, I don't remember when. It was sometime when the pandemic started, and I started like reading for pleasure again. And I really like Jodi Picoult. Does anybody else like Jodi Picoult? Right? She's a bajillion. Yeah, bajillion books. It's really good. And I saw this book. It was about ancient Egypt. It was called The Book of Two Ways. You read it? Yeah, really good, right? And in this book, this woman is an Egyptologist and also a death doula. And I had never heard the term death doula before.
What is a death doula?
So a death doula is somebody who works with the dying and their families and will kind of help you through the process in the same way that like a birth doula helps you through a birth. So this person, usually a social worker, a licensed social worker, will talk to you about your wants and your needs and help you get affairs in order, to write wills, to make trusts, to do all of the, I don't know, like the nitty-gritty stuff that is so hard and so fraught for family, right? Like if you sit down with your family and you fill out these advance directives or what's called 5 wishes now is a really nice one that you can find online. It's very emotional and it's very hard. And this person is there to kind of guide you through that process and maybe have conversations first so that you can get your own head in order, and then you can sit down and have the conversations with your family. And it can be a little bit, and it can happen sooner, right? It can happen when it's not an emergency, when you're not like literally on your deathbed and it isn't so fraught. And it's a lot easier to have these theoretical conversations about what kind of burial you want to have, or what you want your memorial service to look like, or you know, who you want to have all your cow pictures go to in your house, right? Like you can give people things, and it's not so sad. It's more of a celebration. It can be more of a just taking care of your family because it's happening before it's an emergency. And so death doulas, I found out. I decided to do some research after reading this book, and there are quite a few of them, especially in Santa Cruz, as you might imagine. So I found a woman, a really lovely woman who's in the East Bay, and she did a lot of volunteer work, so she was just like super bored during the pandemic. She's like, yeah, pro bono, I like you. I'll talk to you for free. So like we've been meeting on Zoom, and we've been talking through all these things. She's been talking me through like legacy projects that I might want to do, and how to, she taught me all this stuff about green burials, and she's basically my therapist, right? We talk about everything. We talk about side effects and quality of life and how it's going. And she will work with patients for years. She doesn't only work with like the imminently dying, right? She works with all sorts of terminal. So I should mention, maybe for those who don't know, that my diagnosis is terminal. It's not curable. Stage 4 colon cancer right now. There is no cure for it. There is treatment. So I have been on some sort of chemotherapy for, goodness gracious, 4.5 years, with a few breaks for surgery here and there, and then one really lovely 8-month period when I had no evidence of disease. So this death doula, she works with all sorts of terminal patients.
What's chemo like?
What's chemo like? It's a party every other week. It's awful. It's kind of torture. It's not what you see on TV. It's not what you see in the movies, right? Everyone pictures these chemo patients, right? Like bedridden, bald, like super skinny. And yes, some people do go bald and some people do lose a lot of weight on chemo. Those are kind of stereotypes for a reason, but it's so much more than that. It affects kind of every aspect of your life. It causes like dental hygiene problems. Like it can like rots your teeth from the inside, which is something they don't talk about on TV. It causes a lot of like sores all over in interesting places on your body. Right now I'm dealing with a lot of like hand and foot issues. So I'm like losing fingernails and toenails, and it causes hair loss and it causes hair growth. Like I noticed I'm on this medication right now that causes hair growth, which is something you don't hear about in cancer treatment. And so I got this like white little like goatee, which I can't touch. See it? It's like, I'm so, like sometimes I'm so grateful for masks these days because like it causes a acne like face rash and like this little mustache goatee, and it's real attractive. And I can't like shave it or wax it because my skin is so sensitive from this medication. So that's super fun.
You cannot tell, just to
thank you. It is transparent. I can see it, but yeah. Zoom, you can turn on that like make me look better feature on Zoom. I've really appreciated that over the last couple years. But yeah, it's the like little cuts that you get on your hands and your feet that people also don't ever talk about. It's like it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's not pleasant.
doesn't sound pleasant.
It's
So as we got to know each other, we talked about several analogies people make about cancer. Can you tell us your experience with this?
Yeah, you've all heard the like warrior analogy, the like fighting cancer and the cancer warrior, and like the worst is when somebody loses their battle with cancer, right? Because that implies that they lost, that they did something wrong. And I hate that with every fiber of my being. And I think Norm Macdonald recently passed away from cancer, and he had a bit, and I won't be able to quote it exactly, but he said something like, I think that when you die, the cancer dies too, which sounds to me like a draw. So I like that a lot. Nobody loses their battle with cancer because, you know what? Cancer goes too. So, and the whole like the journey, there are just lots of analogies like the cancer journey. I don't know. That doesn't bother me as much as the war. But it's like, I think it's to make people be able to find language to really try to process this terrible disease. So I don't blame anyone for using that type of language, but I would love for it to change. I would love for people to stop calling us warriors and start calling us thrivers, right? I like to call myself a cancer thriver because you can live with cancer. And even if living with cancer means that the only thing that you do all day is get out of bed and go pee, you are still living with cancer. And that's a huge, that's a huge thing. Cancer survivor, right? The minute that you're diagnosed, you are a cancer survivor. It's not just people who reach either, NED, no evidence of disease, or a cure. It's everybody who's dealt with any form of cancer are survivors.
I totally agree with that. I hated when people would compare my mom to a warrior, because it made me feel like if she lost, then she, lost the battle.
Right, she didn't fight
not
for
that.
Right.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter how hard you fight. Just anyway. So once your illness went from emergent to chronic, how did your life change?
Yeah, so I guess I have to take a step back. So in the beginning, I was given 18 months. The doctor, my mom will remember this very well. The doctor said the stupidest thing. He said, this was after I met with the surgeon, and I went to my first oncologist, because it turned out that I wasn't completely blocked, and so they wanted to shrink everything first before they did surgery. So they decided to start chemo before any sort of surgery. And so I met with my oncologist, and he goes, just a couple years ago, people with your diagnosis were living about a year, but now with these new treatments, we've doubled that. And I was like, I'm sorry. I'm not great with math, but twice one is 2, right? Like that's what you're excited about is 2 years to live. I'm 34. That's right, I was 34. And that was devastating. And I decided pretty quick though to like, fuck that. And just, you know, to just ignore the prognosis, because he even said at a later date, he's like, data schmata. It's just, right, it's all just numbers, and every patient is different. And, you know, some people live 18 months, some people have been living with stage 4 colon cancer for 16 years. I mean, it really just depends on the person. But my odds are not great. So the 5-year survival for stage 4 cancer is about 14%. They're not great numbers. It's not,
But still, look at you.
right. I mean, I've almost hit 5 years, you know, since diagnosis. So there we go. I have a shirt that I like to wear that says, oh gosh, what does it say? Chemo brain is terrible. It says, the data point one, I'm that annoying outlier on your data set. Because I plan to be that annoying outlier. But so at first it was this race against death, right? It was chemo, and then it was this ridiculously intense surgery where, you know, it was like this, I don't know, 10-hour surgery where they took out it's called cytoreductive surgery, and they take out every bit of cancer they can see, plus they prophylactically take out any organ that colon cancer tends to migrate towards, like your gallbladder. They took out my uterus and my tubes and my ovaries because they looked a little suspicious. Turns out that my ovaries were full of cancer, hadn't shown up on the screen, on any scan, so I'm really grateful they took it out. You know, they scraped my peritoneum, and then they do this lovely thing where they pump in heated chemo and like topically apply chemo to your, like inside your abdomen. And they literally, like these interns stand there and just like swash you back and forth for 90 minutes. It's like somebody's job. And then they suck out the chemo and you're left with these burns on the inside, and like all these organs are taken out. And so like, that was this huge, like it just became my entire life, was like surviving this surgery and recovering from this surgery. And I had a temporary ileostomy, and I was allergic to the bag, to the ileostomy bag, and so my skin was all fucked up under the bag, and I had to deal with that. And my mom, right, I was a 34-year-old woman, my mom had to sit by my bedside and like wipe my poop that was coming out of my stomach because I had to let my skin breathe. And it was just this very intense period where it was like just really fighting against death, and just making it to the next day was all I could think about. And then I recovered from that surgery. I had the ileostomy reversed, recovered from that surgery, and went back on chemo, and things kind of like settled down a little bit, but then I had an early recurrence in my liver. So more disease showed up in my liver. And then that was another fight, because nobody would operate on me. We went to several different liver specialists. One of them compared me to a broken down car, that you don't put new tires on a broken down car. He actually said those words to me and my mother. And then like the liver, like the big liver guy up in San Francisco said he wouldn't operate on me because the HIPEC surgery that I had causes too much scar tissue. And so he didn't want to deal with all this, because it would have to have been an open resection. And so he didn't want to have to deal with all the scar tissue. So he said that, and then my oncologist took it to the tumor board, and there were all these emails bouncing back and forth, and then I get, out of the blue, I get an email from my original surgeon. Her name is Dr. Megan Kavanaugh at Kaiser Santa Clara, and she basically just says, fuck it, I'll do it. She was like, these men, I'll just do it. Like, she's not even a liver surgeon. So she did it. She did an open resection. I had very little scar tissue, just FYI. And it was, I mean, she was like, it was like the easiest surgery. It was this tumor that was like literally hanging off. It wasn't even in my liver. It was like hanging off my liver. And she just had to do like a little wedge. It was fine. So I had that surgery, and then I had to go back on chemo again. And then after another 8 rounds or so, I was declared no evidence of disease. And it was like, okay, now what? It was such a weird, sudden shift in mindset from Emergent and like a race, a sprint, to this okay, I'm not imminently dying, but I do have to deal with this for the rest of my life. And then once I had a recurrence, and I realized that I probably wouldn't ever be NED again, and that I would have to be on some form of treatment for the rest of my life, that was when it got really hard. I don't know how the rest of my family feels, but I feel like the beginning was easier. Which I know is weird, might sound very strange, but it was easier to have a foe, to like really be racing. Like you can do, right, Laura, you can do anything for 30 seconds. Anything. Even like whatever the Peloton words are, right? You can do anything for 30 seconds. But it's when you have to run the marathon that things get really difficult. And I'm in the marathon right now, and it's not just like a 26-mile marathon, it's like a forever mile marathon. And so learning to switch my mindset from emergent disease to chronic illness was really hard. And I know that you know what it's like to live with a chronic illness, right? It just kind of affects every single part of your life. And you know, there are days where I can't put on my socks because my fingers hurt too much and I have these cuts on my heels. And so like sitting down to put on my socks feels like too much. But like I have to because I have to get up and I have to go downstairs and I have to make lunches for my kids and then I have to go to work, right? So it's like I have to put on my socks, but it just feels like too much sometimes. And it's like pushing through those moments have become the hardest part of this disease, by far, I think.
You talked about your career a little bit, so I'm gonna go back to that for a second. Does your career motivate you? What do you like about it? What do you like about it?
What do I like about my career? Well, I mean, it's teaching. So it's just every day is an adventure, and teaching middle school kids in particular is just fun every day. And I was told today that I look 28, so like
that's awesome.
So they say things like that to me sometimes, and it makes it all worth it. Also, they like my new glasses, so that is motivating.
What do you learn from them?
What do I learn from them? I mean, they're so alive. They're so full of life, and they're so alive, and they live in the moment, and everything is so important to them, right? Like teenagers, they're preteens, and so it's even more. I think like everything is important, and everything is just full. It's just, I don't know, like the most important thing that has ever happened, and so it really keeps me grounded in the moment. And you know, when they're working on an assignment and they can't get like Google Slides to work, and it's like the biggest tragedy they've ever experienced in their lives, it just like really puts things in perspective. It's like that is the biggest tragedy they've ever experienced in their lives, and like that's awesome that it is, and like let's keep it that way. And also just, you know, convincing preteens that like grammar jokes are funny is kind of my major goal in life, and I succeed sometimes and I don't succeed other times, and the grammar's fun. It's time for grammar, it's time for grammar. It was a thing. Yeah, it's just, I can't imagine getting through my life right now without my kids, without my students.
Such a good segue into my next question. Thank you so
We
much.
didn't even plan it.
Can you tell us about your family, your closest friends? What do they do to support you when you have your shitty days?
Well, they feed me, which is really important. I mean, it's been, this pandemic has been weird because it used to be that like, chemo was a party. Like, we used to, like Trevor and my mom and I, we used to, like, play mahjong. At chemo, like, she had a little, like, travel set, and we'd play mahjong, and all the nurses would come over and, like, watch us play mahjong. So it's been weird this past, almost, like, 2 years going by myself. So that's been a kind of a shift. Very recently, they started letting guests in again, one at a time. We can play Siamese. Gosh. But really, it's just understanding, like the people closest to me understand what it is, right? Like what it is that I'm going through, and they offer support in a million different ways. Trevor recently learned how to make matzo balls, which is important, very important. And you know, Jamie brings me red vines and Fritos, and that's important. And like, Kaylee raises my children, and like, and my mom's my mom. She makes me food, and supports me. She wiped the poop off my belly, and she learned how to put on my bag. And I don't know. I definitely couldn't have made it through without a big support system, for sure.
Super important. Yeah. If you were to accomplish one or two things in this room tonight, what would it be? I want everyone who's been putting off getting a colonoscopy to get a colonoscopy. I'm telling you, the drugs are really good. They also have a new pill prep. If you're scared of the liquid, it's new, but you can take, it's like you take 6 pills in the morning and then 6 pills in the evening, and it does cause a little more cramping, but it gets the job done, I hear. So if you're really averse to all that liquid, the new screening age is 45, and actually I think the handout that we gave you is wrong, it says 50. My stepdad noticed That's
that.
totally my fault.
Don't worry about it, but 45 is the new screening age. So if you are 45 or older and you have not had a colonoscopy, get a colonoscopy. Like, if one person in this room gets a colonoscopy because of this, like, I will consider it like job well done. And also just remember that rectal exams are nice and fun.
It's so good. I love getting a colonoscopy. I swear, love it.
Yeah,
It's the best feeling it's ever.
it's really. I
You
mean,
lose like 5 pounds.
people pay
It's nice.
really good money for like colonics and stuff. Like,
100%.
just like put the drink. I do the Miralax and Gatorade prep because I can't handle like, I can't do the bad tasting. I can't just like shoot bad tasting stuff. Like, there are people who can just down that like the gallon. I can't actually do that. So I do Miralax and Gatorade, and I intersperse it with broth or different kinds of Gatorade. And if you put like a little umbrella in it and pretend like you're at a spa and you're just getting a colonic and you just let it do its thing, it actually feels kind of nice the next day. You all cleaned out. It's good. Get a colonoscopy. That's what I want.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
I look forward to mine, I swear.
Oh, can I say something else about colonoscopy?
Yes.
So here's a fun fact about colonoscopy. It is the only cancer screening that is also a cure. You can find polyps, cancerous polyps, during a colonoscopy. The doctor cuts it out and you're done. That's it. That was your treatment. You had cancer and now you don't. It's the only cancer screening that can do that. Now, you have to be really lucky and catch it at just the right time, but it's possible. And early detection of colon cancer makes such a huge difference. If you catch colon cancer when it's stage 1, even stage 2, it's super curable. Super treatable, super curable. It's when you get to stages 3 and 4 that it becomes devastating. So catching it early, getting screened, not being afraid to talk to your doctor, right? Do as I say, not as I do. My husband will tell you, I hate bothering my doctor. So don't be like me. Be like someone else who emails their doctor about every little thing and says, I've been having some weird constipation. When in doubt, tell them you had blood in your stool. Like if your doctor is ignoring you and not giving you a colonoscopy, say, oh man, I just had some blood in my stool, and then they'll give you a colonoscopy, especially if you're young. If you're over 45, it won't be a problem to get a colonoscopy, but yeah, I mean, don't explain away symptoms. I think we started off by talking about how like pregnancy and parenthood masks these really subtle symptoms, and they do. Like what young mom isn't like tired all the time or like slightly nauseous all the time, right? Like everyone, yeah, right? So like you can so easily explain away these symptoms and just don't do it. Listen to your body.
100%. I have one last question. You've outlived your prognosis. Death is no longer imminent. What's your outlook?
It's my outlook. I don't know, that's a hard question.
Tough one, sorry.
I mean, my goal is to be that outlier, right? That example that like, well, she's been living with this for years. There's a woman who was one of the first to receive the surgery that I had, the CRS pipette. It was 16 years when I was diagnosed, and 19 years, she's almost 20 years out of this surgery and hasn't had any follow-up treatment. She was NED from that surgery and never had a single drop of chemo. And she's been NED for 20 years. Like, I want to be that, right? I want to be that person who's like, yeah, I've been living with this for 20 odd years. I want to be that person who like had the 2-year prognosis, but then like 15 years later, there's now a cure, right? I want like science to just like hurry the fuck up and catch up with me and create a cure. That's the other thing is that if I had like kind of one wish for tonight, it's for people, like really generous people like you to pay attention to cancers that don't get as much money for research. So like, give all the money to breast cancer research, like totally save all the boobies, but like all of the other body parts need help too. So if you have the opportunity and the means to donate to organizations that give money for research for colon cancer, prostate cancer, brain cancer, right? Any of those cancers that don't get as much airtime, that aren't as like sexy as boobs, that would be really great if that could happen. Yeah. Because we want to save the boobs and the butts and the guts and the right.
Your special friend.
This is my special friend. He is irritable bowel from the Awkward Yeti comic strip online, and my dog got him, and so he's like extra irritable. You can see he like rips his eye off almost. But yeah, he wants to be saved. He's had a rough life. Poor guy. He makes poop all the time. All the time.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Parish, and we'll come back to questions.
Hey, well, I want to thank Sherry and Jenessa for inviting me here. Is it working?
Yes.
Mask up. Anyway, that was quite a story. So I'm just going to kind of give you guys a little overview. We kind of talked a lot about colon cancer, so just kind of a little more specifics and some pictures maybe to kind of tie everything together. So, colon cancer, if you can see in the handout, so it's really a fairly common cancer. It's right up there with breast. So breast is the number one cancer in women, and prostate's the number one cancer in men. And the third most common cancer is colon cancer. So in both men and women, colon cancer is pretty prevalent. So it's something we should all think about. 5%, 4 to 5% of people will be diagnosed in their lifetime. And it is a very treatable cancer, like Jenessa was saying. We can actually treat it with a colonoscopy if we catch it early enough. And we can treat it with surgery. So unlike some other cancers, like pancreas and stomach cancer, which are very difficult to treat, we can actually treat colon cancer if it's caught early. But in order to do that, we need to find it. So that's where the colonoscopies come in. And we start at age 45 now. We'll talk a little bit more about why that's happening. So this is the colon. You can see kind of in the middle is the small intestine, and then the colon kind of wraps around everything. It's all on the outside. The small intestine goes into what's called the cecum, or right next to the ascending colon. And so all the poop kind of comes in from the small intestine and goes around, and it goes from right to left, and then it goes down into the rectum, which is the one at the end. We used to think all the cancers started on the left side, but they're on both sides. And so when we used to do screenings, we just did the left side of the colon. And now we don't really do that anymore. We just do the whole colon. But it can affect any part of the colon, the left side, the right side. What's called the transverse is the one that goes across. So colon cancer almost always starts from polyps, which I'm sure you've heard about. Polyps are abnormal growth of cells, and they're caused by little mutations that add up, and if you get enough of them, usually 3 or 4 mutations, then you get cancer. So typically this is how it happens. And these pictures are polyps. Those aren't cancers yet, although the bottom one is kind of on its way. In this picture here, you can see the one on the left. You can see polyps all the way until you get to the last one that looks like it's going down to the muscle. That's the cancer. And so you don't really get symptoms until it turns into a cancer. There's really no bleeding, really no changes in bowel movements. You're not going to feel tired. Really, most people have no symptoms at all until the cancer is really advanced. So it's not something that you can kind of wait on until there's symptoms. You can see in this picture over here, you can see that it's bleeding. So that's when you hear about blood in the stool, that's because that the cancer has gotten so big that part of it actually kind of dies. The outside part of it dies and falls off, and it causes blood. So that's where the bleeding comes from. It's typically when it's more advanced. So yeah, staging. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 3 just means that it's in the lymph nodes, and 4 means that it's in other organs. And then once as long as it's in 1 or 2, it's treated with surgery. But anything really in 3 or 4 is surgery and chemotherapy. So for screening, we used to think everyone just got screened when they're 50, and that was and a lot of people, actually most people still think it's 50. About 3 to 4 years ago, the American Cancer Society changed their recommendation for everyone to do it at 45, and that's regardless of risk factors. And it wasn't until this year that the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force changed their recommendation to 45, which is important because this is the USPSTF. It's a long name, but basically this is what Medicare bases their insurance coverage on. So because they've now changed their recommendation, the insurance companies have to pay for it. So, and then all the other insurance companies follow Medicare. So now they don't really have a choice, they can't deny it. So anyone with no risk factors at all gets a colonoscopy at 45. Now that's if you have no risk factors. anyone in your family with polyps, you need to get it, with a family history of polyps, it starts at 40. Or, if someone had colon cancer, so, for example, Jenessa's kids need to get their colonoscopies 10 years before she was diagnosed. So that's early 20s. So a lot of people, don't know that. It's not only, it's not just 40s or 50s, it's actually, you have to look at the whole picture. So family history, if you have parents with polyps, which a lot of people do, nowadays I find polyps about 80 to 90% of colonoscopies I do, so it's very, very common. Most of them are benign, but occasionally that they're more advanced than that. But it's becoming more and more prevalent at younger ages. So what's going on now is we have this, I guess, we call it early onset colon cancer. So basically, if you're younger than 50 and you have colon cancer, it's called early onset. But we don't really know why this is happening. There's a lot of research going on right now, but we think maybe it has to do with processed foods, American Western diet, red meat, but we don't have great evidence on any of those things. About 50% of cancers in people younger than 50 have to do with, you have a family history or you have a genetic mutation. The other 50%, there's no family history. It's bad luck. So, there's more research being done, and hopefully we figure this out soon. But for now, we just have to be very thorough with screening and spread the word, really, that it's becoming more and more prevalent at younger ages. So this just shows these lines that are going down kind of at the bottom here, that's anyone older than 50, colon cancer is decreasing, and that's purely because of colonoscopies. It's not because they're less likely to get colon cancer, it's just that we're finding it. But we're not doing colonoscopies that much on people younger than 50, so it's going up. And that's a new thing. So screening, there are other screening options other than colonoscopies. You can get, basically, if any of you had your stool sent to the lab looking for blood, it's called a FIT test. There's a new one called the Cologuard test. They're better than nothing, but they're not as good as a colonoscopy in the sense that they don't really find polyps. They are good at finding cancer, but they're not good at finding polyps, so it's a little bit too late. Although it's definitely better than nothing, and the Cologuard test can detect some advanced polyps. So the bowel prep, I know Jenessa mentioned the pills. So that's a new thing that started about 8 months ago. It's actually 12 pills, so 24 pills, but it's pills and water, and that's all it is. It takes a 20-minute, it's usually a 20-minute procedure, anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. The risks are pretty low. So I think, I was actually pleasantly surprised to find out how much, people really enjoy the colonoscopy. Or even more so the rectal exam. I thought, for sure the rectal exam was definitely not enjoyable. Yeah. Although you actually do, that's another thing. You actually do pap smears in the anus too, looking for anal cancer. So a lot of people don't know about that either, but it's the exact same thing as cervical cancer you can get in the anus. And so I do pap smears for the anus. It's the exact same disease process. The test is literally exactly the same, but a lot of people don't know about that. So that there is no screening regimen. But basically, it's the same virus, HPV, that causes that. So it's just another thing that we don't really know about. So colonoscopy, basically, we look for polyps. You can see the pictures there, and then try to remove those polyps any way we can. usually with a snare, which is the thing on top, basically just cut the polyp off at the stalk. You can also use forceps. But basically any polyp that we see, we take it out. And this can prevent cancer because usually we catch them, before they're too big. If it's already become a cancer, they're still very treatable with surgery or with there are some, more advanced techniques that you can do to remove it with the, endoscopically. And it's also important to know that this is a very slow growing cancer. It takes usually 7 years for a polyp to become a cancer. So that's where the 10-year thing came from insurance companies trying to find a cost-effective way to treat a large portion of the population. So because it takes 7 years for a polyp to become a cancer, if you get your colonoscopy every 10 years, you can miss. There's definitely a window there that we can miss. So it's important to know that if you had polyps, that changes as far as insurance companies are concerned. So it can be 5 years. So I typically recommend most people have polyps, so it's usually 5 years. And the reason, and most GI docs or colorectal surgeons will do screening every 5 to 7 years because it takes 7 years for a cancer to grow. So in 10 years, you could miss something. So it's not wrong to do a colonoscopy every 10 years, but as long as you're aware that you could miss something. There's a window there, but as long as you get colonoscopies regularly, it's a great way to prevent at least one of the many cancers that are out there. So that's it. Thank you so much. And then we'll have Jenessa come back and we'll answer you guys' questions.
Thank you, guys. Grace and I are going to come around if you have any questions, comments for either one. Aaron, hold on to your mic. And just raise your hands and I'll come around. Or Grace. I'm going to hold it, just COVID. So top left.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you recommend that if they found polyps in your colon, that they should repeat it every 5 years.
If you find polyps in your colon, repeat every 5 years.
So the guidelines would say, that depends. It depends on the type of polyp. So technically, according to the guidelines, you need to have more than 2 adenomatous polyps to qualify for 5 years. The reality of it is, personally, I recommend doing it 5 years if there's any polyps, and that's benign or adenomatous. And the reason for that is you're between, for 10 years, there's a window where you're missing it. And so the insurance company, no matter what polyp you have, the insurance company doesn't see the difference, so they'll cover it for 5 years. So the reality of it, personally, I think if you have a polyp, it's better to wait 5 years. But it's not wrong if you have 1 or 2 polyps and they're not advanced to do it in 10 years.
And in between, would you recommend to do the laboratory testing, for example, of the stool?
So some people do that. I don't recommend that because then kind of what do you do with it? So if you're doing a colonoscopy every 5 years and you get a stool test that's positive, most of those stool tests are false positives, meaning that you have hemorrhoids or there's, it gets set off by something else. So it's kind of one or the other. That's how I recommend kind of, if you're doing the colonoscopy, just do the colonoscopy, don't do the other tests. And most of my patients get them every 5 years for the most part.
This is for Jenessa. I've actually known Jenessa from high school, but we lost touch and got back in touch because of Yavnet, and it all brings us back together. But I guess I always wondered kind of how this affects your kids and what you say to them.
I didn't even talk about that. We're just very honest with them. I remember taking them out for pancakes and being like, so I have this thing called cancer. And they were really young, so they didn't have many questions at first. As they've gotten older, right, so my daughter was, help me again, how old was she? 7. And so, and she's 11 now, right? So like she's very aware of what's going on. And so really it's just answering, right? My mom always taught me to like answer the question they ask and then see what happens, right? Like don't give them like all the information that they don't need, but just like answer the question that they ask. And then if they have another question, to answer that one, right? So like there was a period about a year ago, maybe, it might have been triggered by the pandemic actually, where my son, out of the blue, was like, so how do people die? And I remember having this really like intense conversation with him about like, you know, there are some organs that you like need to live, and there are some that you don't need to live, and so the organs that you do need to live get hurt or die themselves, and that's when you die, right? So like, we had this really kind of like scientific, in-depth conversation about it. It was all very theoretical. It had nothing to do with me, but I think, you know, it had to do with COVID and with me because he was so young when I was diagnosed, right? Like he's never known me not sick, and so, you know, we're just honest and just answer their questions and also try to normalize talking about it. So it's not, you know, we don't have to whisper cancer, right? Like in the olden days, it's not something that is taboo. And so it does come up at the dinner table sometimes. And they go to a camp, right? They go to Camp Kesem, which is a beautiful camp for kids whose parents have cancer. And so they talk about it there. They have friends whose parents have cancer. It's just kind of a part of their lives. And what I'm just amazed with is just how resilient kids are and how it is like anything can become normal, especially because they were so young. But yeah, I've never lied. I've never kind of sugarcoated it. I have never told them that I was supposed to die after 2 years, right? That is not information that I shared with them. But you know, my daughter has asked me like, are you ever gonna not have cancer? I say, no, I'm always gonna have cancer. And then she goes, you know, unless science. I'm like, yes, unless science.
Thank you so much, Jenessa. We've known each other since before you were born. Could you share the silver linings?
Yes. I started blogging about my experience. And one of the things that I found really helpful, and I just learned that Bonnie found really helpful, which is touching, is these silver linings. And so always trying to find the silver linings to any situation. I'm not very good at that. It doesn't come naturally to me. And so I had to, when I started writing this blog, I kind of had to force myself to think like, okay, what are the actual good things about what is happening to me? And it started off, it was really difficult to do, and in fact it's still difficult to do, but it was a really good practice for me to get into. And I haven't been blogging this year, because I haven't really had much to say, so I've missed finding those silver linings. But things like, discovering new board games happened a lot in the beginning of my treatment, or I don't know, I don't even remember what some of the silver linings were, but Disneyland. Oh my gosh, we went to Disneyland because I was going to start treatment again. And I was like, screw it, we're going to Disneyland. So we never would have gone to Disneyland, I don't think, otherwise. And so, that was a fun silver lining. But thank you, and I'm so glad that you adopted that as a practice too.
For those of us who are over 75, I remember my last colonoscopy at 70. I went to sign the postcard that they were going to send in 10 years to remind me. I said, do I really need to fill this thing out? And they said, well, why the hell were you? And I told them. And they said, oh no, you're done at 70, because there was no family history. Do you still buy into that? I'm 77 now, so it was 7 years ago, and maybe things have changed.
So, again, if you look at the recommendations, they say there's like different categories. So 75 to 85 is a gray area.
Right. Okay.
So personally, I mean, if you're healthy and you're gonna live longer, than 10 more years, then I do screening up to 85.
Oh.
And so, but after 85, it's basically symptoms. But yeah, really, 85 is the new 75 for now, and my guess is that will probably go, as life expectancy gets longer, that will probably change. So, yeah, but again, the 50 to 75 thing is a very kind of old school guideline, and now it's more like it's 45 to 85.
I was afraid. Okay. I don't know why I asked, because I was afraid you were going to say that.
Think of the drugs, they're
Yeah,
so
I
good.
know.
I have a question for both of you. From the doctor's perspective, do you recommend a special diet or a change in diet? Jenessa, have you changed your diet short of red wines and Fritos?
So I typically recommend to my patients to have a high fiber diet and limit red meat. There's some evidence that shows that low fiber and a lot of like processed foods and red meat, as well as lack of exercise, can predispose you to colon cancer. It's not strong correlate. It's not as strong as like smoking and lung cancer, but there's correlations there, and so. And fiber is very, it's healthy. It lowers your cholesterol. It prevents hemorrhoids, diverticular disease. So I typically recommend high fiber diet, a lot of vegetables, and limiting like red meat.
So I haven't eaten red meat since 1997. I actually remember the day I last ate red meat. So, while yes, of course, there's studies and there are correlations. I find anecdotally, I'm part of a community called Colon Town. It's an online support group, and I find anecdotally that so many of the under 40s are super duper healthy, right? Live really active lifestyles, eat very healthy. Many of them are vegan, vegetarian, and so it's not right. This early onset stuff. It's mind-boggling. I have not changed my diet. I refuse to eat kale, as most people know. I hate it. And I haven't really changed much. I am supposed to be taking that stupid fucking vitamin D, which I do occasionally remember to take my vitamin D. And I just eat what feels good. When it was kind of in the beginning, it was more of like, you're in treat, like just eat what you can eat. Now that it's forever, I'm finding that I need to change that a little bit. That I probably should be a little bit more careful about my diet and just make sure I'm getting enough. I know I do eat veggies and I eat salads most days, but no, I haven't made any like big lifestyle changes.
I just want to know, is there a relationship between anemia and colorectal cancer?
I mean, I was super anemic in the beginning. I called them my lube changes because they hooked, so I have a port right here where I get my medication, and they hooked up my port, and then it looked like oil that they just gave me like straight iron into my port. So I think it can cause anemia. Right?
Yeah, that's right. It either blood loss from the actual cancer, or you get anemia of chronic disease. So if you have, if you have advanced cancer, you can get basically your bone marrow doesn't make as much blood cells. But it's only because of the cancer it causes the anemia. But there's a lot of other causes of anemia.
Thank you both so much for your, stories and inspiration and just sharing everything with us. I'm curious, Dr. Parish, about thinking about other digestive issues like celiac, and when we talk about the polyps, I'm thinking about the villi, and it's so prominent in celiac, and I'm just wondering if you could just talk a little more about what do we think of those relationships on the way in to the colon.
So celiac disease is not associated with cancer, and there's small bowel cancer is very, very rare. It's not, it happens, and unfortunately when it's caught, it's typically very advanced because we can't do a colonoscopy with a small bowel. But you can, it's very, very difficult, and only a few people can do it. There's also a capsule you can swallow, but it's not, there's no screening for it because it's so rare. So it's usually not something that we have to worry about, but it can happen. It's just one of those cancers that, just like, for example, like pancreas cancer, or, that it just, there's not much we can do, it's just to prevent it or find it.
Would you say there's any inverse between the idea of villi dying versus the polyps growing? How do we think about those two processes?
No, I don't, so it's basically, so you're saying the villi dying in celiac disease? I don't think there's any association with celiac and small bowel cancer, as far as I know. And then colon cancer has to do with mutations that are kind of developing over time. So, for example, like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, you get damage to the lining of the colon. And so over time, when there's a lot of inflammation and a lot of damage to that area, it predisposes you to colon cancer. So you're at higher risk. But it's a little bit different than the way celiac works. So it's more because there's more inflammation there, whereas in celiac there's not.
I'm curious about the rise of incidence of young adults. I have 2 adult children in their mid to late 30s, and I know you said you don't know why, but in your professional educated opinion, can you surmise why you think that there's this rise in incidence and what you've done to prevent it, or is it due to diet, alcohol, lifestyle, exercise, etc., limiting pregnancy, baby's later? I don't know.
I wish I had an answer, but Jenessa, I had another patient. I had a patient who was 30, healthy. His wife had appendiceal cancer, and then I did a colonoscopy, and he actually had colon cancer, and I was shocked. It was like 32. It didn't really have any sense. Actually, I did the colonoscopy because he had rectal. And it wasn't really even an indication to do it, but I had this I'm just going to do the colonoscopy. And he had no risk factors at all. So, and we really don't know, my guess. It could be like a virus problem. It could be environmental. It could be diet related. It could be there's some kind of food that has something in it. The bottom line is we don't know, so we just have to screen earlier and be more kind of in tune with our family history and symptoms.
And doctors are becoming much more aware and not refusing colonoscopies to patients anymore. So I hear horror stories from people my age and younger who've been refused colonoscopies and pushed off because they're just too young to have colon cancer. And doctors are being a lot better about that now than they were even just 4 years ago when I was diagnosed. I was super lucky that my doctor was just like, let's just do it. Because that's not everybody's story. But yeah, it's true. There's so many people that I know are getting diagnosed during pregnancy, and it's just tragic.
We have time for one last question because we're over. I know you've been waiting.
I have a question with respect to the cost of a colonoscopy. I'm over 75 and I've had one colonoscopy in my life. When I was expecting to be able to request one, I was told that none are given over 75. And my thought is that if the medical group that you usually receive your care from won't do it because Medicare says it's not approved, can we pay for it?
So you're over 75 and you refused a screening colonoscopy because they said it wasn't covered, is that right?
It wasn't that it wasn't covered, it was just that Medicare didn't approve colonoscopies for people 75 or over.
They do now, but a lot of doctors don't know about that because 75 to 85 is this kind of gray area, but for screening up to 85, Medicare should cover. So, just, I mean, yeah. Or a family history of polyps. Everyone has family history of polyps. No one can, like, they're not going to look back at your medical history, so that's probably the easiest. And in family history of polyps, it becomes a screening colonoscopy, which is 100% covered, whereas a diagnostic for blood in your stool is usually. So family history of polyps is usually a good consider. Sorry, I could barely. Yeah.
I had indicated that my grandmother was successfully treated for colon cancer. That didn't make a difference. So my last thought was maybe I can offer to pay for it. So how much does a colonoscopy cost?
Well, out of pocket, it would be expensive because unfortunately, there's a facility fee that's expensive. There's a pathologist and there's an anesthesiologist. So there's a lot of people involved, and so if someone's not insured, then it becomes more of an issue. But if anyone has insurance, then it's usually we can get it covered.
Yeah, fight for it.
Yeah,
Have Sherry call.
Yeah.
Seriously. Have me call, everybody knows that by now.
Wait, raise your hand if you're gonna get a colonoscopy now. Oh my God, look at that. Like a handful. Yay!
I think we are out of time. Unless anybody has anything that's so important they need to say it right now. Thank you so much to Erin and Jenessa. This is so important to talk about and destigmatize, and so grateful for all of you guys coming, and Family Matters for sponsoring this and sponsoring the women's community. Next topic is mental health. Go party.
the Bill security for a second. That's why I just wanted to be like that.
That's okay. I didn't even notice. Go Cancer.